Hello, and thanks for taking time to rise up. I'm Ennis, and welcome to spring. And you know what spring means? Spring means it's tax time. And this episode we have in our studio, the Tax Man. Now, it's been a very busy month since we've last seen each other. And let me tell you what I've been up to. I turned another year older, and I feel blessed to be loved and to love and to be back with you again. I've also been busy writing about getting groped by a Hollywood star, about my broken heart, about the shattering of my faith, and about a new spiritual journey that began in earnest 1 year ago. Plus, I rose up along with my daughter and more than 1 million young people, a number which includes people who are young at heart like me. And we marched for our lives and theirs against gun violence. Hundreds of thousands joined Parkland, Florida students at their march in Washington, D.C., while thousands rallied here in Connecticut at our state capitol. From where we stood, we really couldn't see anything. We certainly couldn't hear very well, but there were speakers, including some local politicians, folks from Sandy Hook, and what most interested me were seeing the teachers, seeing the signs, seeing all of those children, their parents, people from all walks of life, including us, carrying signs that sent a message. Guns are not fun. Guns are dangerous. Teachers need protection. And children need saving. We're joined now by a West Hartford man who knows a lot about rising up. Kevin Sullivan has served as mayor of West Hartford, town councilor, state senator, president of the state senate, and lieutenant governor. He is now Connecticut's state tax commissioner and my guest here on Rise Up. Welcome, Commissioner.
Don, thank you very much.
I'm so glad you could join us.
Happy to be with you.
So
that was a great rally on Saturday.
I was going to ask you, were you there? Because
yes,
I didn't see you,
there.
But boy, I couldn't see anything.
Yeah, I was up on the steps with some of the legislators and other folks who were there. It was just mind blowing and so moving to see all those young people. You know, I think I said to one of them, we've misled you long enough. It's time for you to lead us.
It's amazing to me that young people have such a terrible reputation in some quarters, and yet I think they're doing a better job than any of our generations since maybe the Vietnam era.
Well, that was funny you say that. There was one chant at one point, which I won't repeat, but it was to the, I remember different words to it at a different time in 1960s. No, it was great, and I really hope they're heard, and I hope that they can stay the course beyond this, that they don't get discouraged, because it doesn't happen all at once, as you know, but you still have to keep pushing.
I was the first journalist from ABC News on the scene in Sandy Hook. I looked into the eyes of the moms and dads as they came out of the firehouse, having just learned that their first graders were dead. Yeah. It forever changed me. I grew up daughter of a police officer. We had guns in the house. I know how to shoot. I'm a pretty good shot. I never personally felt of having a gun. But it was that moment that I thought, well, this is going to be the end. We're finally going to do something. And it's 5 years later.
Well, we did in Connecticut. I know you had the governor on, and I know that was a traumatic time for him, too, because he got there and may have said this to you. They weren't telling the, as you probably remember, they weren't telling the parents anything, and the parents were just dying of wanting to know one way or the other what had happened, and he finally said, look, I'm going to go tell them one by one, and it was a hard thing for him. And we did make progress in Connecticut. We just can't seem to break through at the national level and break the stranglehold that the NRA has.
It's really about money when it comes down to it, isn't it?
It is, and fear. I think when you're running for office, you want to know who's with you, and the NRA, I have to give them credit, they do a remarkable job of supporting the people who are their clones. And I think that the people on the other side have not always gotten the kind of enthusiasm. And that's why this movement really needs to translate into the next election cycle and the next election cycle after that. And hopefully we will make a difference. And do you think registering the vote is key to that victory? Voting is key to that victory. My wife would say, the former registrar of voters here in town, so we were talking last night about that very fact. She says it's great that they're registering. but they got to vote. And unfortunately, young people have a history of registering and not voting. I don't think that's going to happen this time. I think they're going to show up.
Do you think it's because people are just feeling like their vote doesn't count? I have a good friend who's just never bothered to register, and I can't get through to her. And it's not because she doesn't care, it's because she just doesn't see how her vote could make a difference.
It always makes a difference. Even if it's not a close election, it always makes a difference. First of all, because you get to express what you think about the people who are running, so it makes a difference to you as a person. It's a duty I think we have. And there are elections. I've seen one election won and lost by 3 votes. So you never know what difference it's going to make, it's something I think we do take for granted. People have unrealistic expectations sometimes too. Well, I never voted because the first time I voted, the person I voted for didn't win. Well, okay, you know, I'm really...
It's not a guarantee, right?
Not a guarantee.
Now, speaking of making a difference, you've been rising up for decades. Can you tell us how you decided to get involved?
It's a miracle I can still rise up if it's been for decades.
I meant in terms of political activism.
I know.
But let's keep it clean now.
Well, I didn't even mean that.
No, but I really mean, I want to know, what is it that must have inspired you to say, I don't want to sit by the sidelines anymore?
It really was in the last few years of high school and the first few years of college, and it was Vietnam. That was the cause of my generation. I had the good fortune to sit there and watch myself get a very high draft number, but I have friends who got very low draft numbers. And it was just such a horrendously bad policy position for this country to begin with, not to mention the lives that were lost over it. And so, you know, you can't, if you don't think this is a good thing, you better do something about it. And so I got involved in that movement, also involved in politics that way, because in 1968, right here in West Hartford, we successfully ran a delegate primary on behalf of then Senator Eugene McCarthy, who we then went to the convention as a McCarthy delegation. So it all started with that, and I think it starts with, I mean, it starts before that. I think you have a set of values that you learn and things, but if someone had said to me back in 1965, 1966, you know, someday you will have been all these things that you've been, I would have laughed at them, because I was a nerdy high school kid and wasn't going to be anything much other than professionally I'd be something, but I was a very shy kid. I wasn't going to be any of these things. Now,
you mentioned Vietnam. As we tape this, one of the issues that's in the news, and may still be in the news as we air, is the service of transgender military troops. Here in Connecticut, we have a very affirming policy of representing and recognizing transgender Americans. Our president, though, who's been called by some cadet bone spur because he never did serve and got deferments during Vietnam, has issued policies where basically banning almost all transgender troops. Do you have an opinion on that, and do you have any advice for the people who feel like it just seems like the tide is turning back against LGBT people?
Well, the good news, I think, is that the people around this person we have as the president, the temporary president of the United States, the people around him have been able to stop these worst impulses of his on this particular issue. You worry a little bit, we worry a little bit, that as that cast of characters changes in the White House and you get a person like Bolton and some of the others that are now in there, will there be somebody saying to, particularly in the military, because the military response to this has been very good. They said, no way. I mean, Mr. President, you can say anything you want, but we take people. We don't take categories. We take people who are willing to do their duty and stand up and fight if necessary and make that sacrifice. So it's ridiculous to hear the things that he says and about this. And there's no doubt in my mind that if he were to be successful in trying to impose this bigoted attitude of his, that the courts would very quickly overturn it.
And that's where we're at right now. Yeah. Sources have told me that the memo that originally was issued by the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, to the President fostered inclusion. It was favoring inclusion. And according to sources, Mike Pence, the Vice President, who's very right-leaning, and advisors like Ryan Anderson, anti-trans writer, Tony Perkins, the head of the Family Research Council, that they told Mr. Mattis, this is what you should write. And he changed it because, well, he serves at the pleasure of the president.
Well, I mean, you have to understand, it's what I was not going to talk about, but I think it's great to talk about it. You have to understand that this is a man, Trump, for whom it is all about destabilization, and it is all about playing to people's fears and bigotries. So, and he's, you know, if you're a rational person, you sort of look at this president and you say, isn't he embarrassed, or how does he not understand that this isn't good policy? None of those things, I think, matter to Donald Trump. I think what matters to Donald Trump is being the focus of it, the center of attention,
Absolutely.
number one. And number two, playing to the base, playing to the base, playing to the base.
What do they want?
And what do they want? So what bigoted thing do they feel that they need today? And it's been shocking. I mean, I think you watched some of the things recently with some of the allegations of extramarital activity on the president's part. And there was a great interview, I think it was Katie Couric. She went to some folks who were, I think, considered to be fairly conservative Christians, and putting to them, how do you settle this? Well, he takes the right positions on policy. We don't care about behavior, and I've never heard such a thing. I mean, it's shocking. But this is a man who really does. His job is to keep us off base and to be more and more outrageous, because each outrageous act makes the last one seem less outrageous, and that's the danger to democracy.
Well, he inspired me to do one thing. I got involved. I started attending town hall meetings. I introduced myself to you, and
now you're on Democratic Town Committee as an alternate.
to
Absolutely.
District 1. I'm very proud to be, and I'm wondering, how do we translate that energy on the local level to wider politics? Is it translatable? It
is translatable. I mean, I think that every message is a message. All politics, as they say at the end of the day, is local. It's hard in a state like Connecticut, where, you know, the good news is that the people who represent us as governor and in Congress and by and large in the legislature have pretty good attitudes and vote pretty well and right on the issues. So you say, well, you know, why should I be in, what am I going to accomplish? I've already got great representatives. And one of the things we're trying to push, I think, this year, because it's become technologically possible to do this, is, and it's not suggesting that people don't work for Chris Murphy, they should, but it's also that I'm hoping the Democratic Party in particular will create the ability at the local grassroots level to be in a calling station, making phone calls to Missouri, making phone calls to Montana, making phone calls to wherever some of these races are that are more challenged. And with the technology we can do that. I remember in Hillary's campaign, I spent one night talking to people in New Hampshire from West Hartford. So it can be done. And we need to do that as well as focus at the local level and be organized.
And you've seen Connecticut evolve. Over the last 10 years, we've gone from a state that traditionally elects a Republican governor and has Democratic legislators in a majority, to a Democratic governor serving 2 terms and still a slim but Democratic majority in the legislature. What do you see in your little crystal ball for the future? Are we going to stay on that path, or is it going to be the same pendulum swing that we had in the national level?
It's an interesting question. I mean, as good a Democrat as I am, I also think there's something to be said for a multiplicity of opinions in the legislative process. I never had like a super majority in the Senate in my years in leading the Senate. I was 19-17 for quite a number of years. And there's something that comes with that. It makes you be a little less, I think you have to talk about things, you have to sell things more when you have that kind of competition. That's not an answer to your question. The answer to your question is, at the end of the day, I think this is a blue state. It has blue state values. I think the people of Connecticut pretty smart, pretty savvy, pretty well informed, pretty tolerant, actually better than tolerant, accepting and engaging. But the legislature has, I think, struggled to connect, the Democratic legislature has struggled to connect with some of the economic concerns that people have. Why isn't our state doing better? Why aren't we growing faster? Why haven't we recovered more of that energy from the Great Recession? And pocketbook issues are really important to people because it's their families.
No, I talked to the governor about the unfunded pensions and about bailing out cities like Hartford. Some people want to see Hartford go bankrupt. And if they don't pay their water bills, we all have to pay.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because I remember when the mayor of Hartford came out to West Hartford to talk about how important Hartford was to the region, and our mayor welcomed him, and I think people were pretty supportive. Then, when we were about to lose virtually all of our education money, I never heard him come out to West Hartford or say anything about, so if we're together, we're together. I mean, and that bothered me a great deal. But the budget is I look back and I take responsibility as the next person have. I was talking to a bunch of former colleagues one day, and I said, do you remember absolutely any one time, even once, when anyone from a governor's office or even ourselves had a conversation about long-term unfunded liability? And the answer is no. Nobody could remember that conversation. I remember a conversation when I was a little intern or a little staff person at the Department of Education in Hartford with the state senator, where I brought him a list and I said, look, here's the cost of school construction run out over 20 years. I said, we can't afford it in 20 years. And he said, son, I'm not going to be here in 20 years. So that's part of the problem.
You mentioned before that you like government that has lots of opinions, and you quoted earlier one of my beloved saints in politics, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, when you said all politics is local.
Sure.
He also said you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own set of facts. Isn't it true that today the hardest part is that everyone thinks that the other guy is wrong, and no matter what evidence there is, that facts don't matter, and that generally it seems like people are voting against people rather than for people?
I think there's something to that, and I think some of it is the way in which we have been able to, and I'm a bad example of this. I mean, we don't have Fox on at home. My wife will turn it on occasionally just because she believes it's important to hear that message.
I applaud your wife.
But I don't watch it. You know, we probably have CNBC on most of the time. So we've all been able to kind of choose what meal we want to eat and what tastes good to us, and we just keep eating it. And when somebody presents an alternative to us, it seems unreal. So I think the technology has allowed us to retreat into our own point of view so much that we really don't have an opportunity to hear alternative points of view. And then I think that raises the decibel level when people present their alternative points of view. And neither of which is particularly good for conversation, discussion, and compromise, which at the end of the day are how you get things done. So I think there is something to what you say. I don't know what the antidote to that is. It probably is, making sure that there is some place you can go where a fact is a fact. And again, back to the Trump presidency. This is a guy who's been so successful at he just ignores facts. Facts are irrelevant. They were probably irrelevant when he was huckstering his business too, because that's what he comes from. You don't tell the truth about the deal. You tell as much of a lie about the deal as you can get away with.
To get it done. Exactly.
Yeah. And so I think we all have drifted a little bit. We would be better to focus on the facts, and we would be better once in a while to listen to somebody we don't agree with.
Now, a lot of people don't agree that they should be paying more taxes, but let's face it, this is that time of year. Yeah. What advice, first off, do you have to viewers who are hesitating at getting their taxes done?
Get them done sooner than later. You're going to have to do them anyway. The sooner, whether it's the federal or the state, the sooner a person files, particularly if they're expecting a refund, the less likely it is that somebody will sneak in and steal that refund from them. And this happens every year. You get the person who calls in and we send them a check or a notice about their refund, and they say, but I didn't pay my taxes yet. And so one of the things people can do is, and it's a little late now already, but sooner is better. And if you have questions, if you have concerns, even if you think you may have trouble paying, don't just not do it. Contact, in my case, the Department of Revenue Services and say, look, I can't pay all of this right now. Is there a payment plan that I can get on? We do payment plans for people. I'm more interested in having taxpayers than I am interested in having bankrupt taxpayers. So
you anticipated my next question, which is what happens if people can't pay? I imagine that in this economy, there are more people who are in that crisis right now, and I'll raise my hand and say I'm one of them. I'm unemployed. I'm a single mom raising 3 kids by myself and living off of Social Security and occasional writing jobs. So my taxes are, when I see the accountant later this week, are going to be a mess, but I'm going to do my best to work out a deal. How many people do you think? Is it increased? Is it the same?
Well, whenever the economy is a little weak, you have people who are struggling. Again, my message is simple, and that is don't avoid it, don't forget it, don't not do it. It never gets better that way. If you have a problem, contact the feds, contact us, talk about it. We'll see what we can do, whether that problem is future or past. There are some circumstances on the business side where it's a little bit harder, where you see somebody who for 5 or 6 quarters has been borrowing their employees' withholding, or borrowing the state sales tax that belongs to the state of Connecticut. And you want to say to those folks, not for nothing, but you really may want to think about this business model you have, because if you're relying on stealing taxes in order to survive, maybe there's something wrong with what you're doing.
Do you think that Connecticut has been overly generous to its business partners in terms of tax breaks? Because I know that's how you lure and keep businesses here.
Well, I wouldn't say overly generous, no. I think we are, the truth of the matter is that in Connecticut's sort of effective tax burden on businesses is relatively low. You want to encourage people to be here. The income tax, I think, is probably more of a disincentive. Not having one, you need to have one. But at the higher end, it's probably a bit of a disincentive. People who can walk with their lives will walk with their lives to avoid that sometimes. But taxes aren't the big challenge in Connecticut. I think our big challenge is figuring out what the economy of the state looks like next. Not what it was, but what it will be.
Forecasting.
Forecasting. Where are the things that we can grow? What are we good at? No matter how many incentives you give to a company, it's just not going to work because it's not a Connecticut. It's not going to work here in Connecticut. But what can we be good at? And stick to that, and make sure your policies are all driven around that, and also make sure that you can keep the next generation here.
Let me ask you one more question. I know you got stuff to do. Can you tell me who I should vote for, or who you're recommending, who you're boosting for the next governor? Who's going to succeed Governor Malloy?
Well, I don't know who's going to succeed him. I hope it's Jonathan Harris. Jonathan Harris is the former former mayor of West
Just
Hartford,
like you, a former mayor.
And my successor in the state senate. He's a listening guy. I mean, he's eloquent in his own right, but he's also somebody who listens, and I think and thinks. And those are the two things I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody who is going to try to hear people out and find a way to get to some of these decisions. Now, in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, obviously, we're not lacking in candidates. We have lots of candidates. The question, I think, really is, and the governor probably discussed this with you, who also is willing to do the right thing, even if it's not popular? And that's the hardest thing.
He did indeed, and you can watch that episode on our YouTube channel and here on West Hartford Community TV. Thank you, Commissioner.
My pleasure. Thanks,
It's been
Don.
a pleasure. I'll see you at the next Town Hall meeting and Town Democrats meeting. Time now for our special correspondent report. Each month we meet somebody who's rising up, and they tell us about how and why. If you'd like to be our next contributor, go to our website, lifeafterdawn.com, and you'll find out details. But now, let's see who's rising up now.
Hello, I'm Amanda Brewer. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, and this is my story about rising up into advocacy. I have 6 amazing children, and about 3 years ago, my second child came out as transgender. I like to say that my world changed for the better that day. I got a chance to stand outside the snow globe that we had created as a family and look back inside at how I was raising my children. I thought we were a very inclusive family, but in reality we were not. So my husband and I immediately started to work to change that. I also started working in advocacy. I started speaking at our local school board meetings, with doctors at the local hospital, and with my legislators. In the last 3 years, there have been a lot of positive changes. The school board has now adopted a non-discrimination policy. We now have medical insurance that covers our daughter's medical care. And there are now actors and actresses on TV that she can look up to. And there are also some downsides. There were rescinded policies for trans students this last year, and there was a military ban. This is especially hard for us because we're a military family. So knowing that the leader of your military doesn't support your family isn't very easy to take. But that's why you can't give up. That's why you've got to keep going. We all need allies. We all need somebody that can be there for us when our voice is weak and we're tired. And that's what an advocate will do. They'll keep speaking when others can't. And they'll take their story and they'll keep telling everybody about it so that people know that there's somebody who will stand up for them. And I hope to do this as long as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for tuning in to Rise Up. I'm Dawn Ennis. Next month, another episode, and until then, please like, share, and subscribe right here on YouTube. And if you want more information, our website, lifeafterdawn.com, will tell you everything you need to know about our guests, the issues, how you can be a contributor, and about getting your taxes done. Thanks for tuning in.